He traveled light years to give her a gift, but what he asked in return shattered her. The merchant's desperate gamble. Zephyr Thorne had exactly 72 hours to live, and he was spending them elbow-deep in the wreckage of a ship that probably should have stayed lost. The derelict vessel hung in the shadow of Nexus Station like a metal corpse, its hull torn open by whatever cosmic disaster had claimed it 3 centuries ago. Most salvagers avoided ships this old. Too much radiation, too many hazards, too little profit. But Zephyr wasn't most salvagers. He was a desperate man with a death warrant hanging over his head and a debt to the Void Syndicate that would make lesser criminals weep. His scanner beeped as he floated through what had once been the ship's cargo bay. The reading made him pause, magnetic boots clanking against twisted metal plating. The energy signature was unlike anything in his 15 years of quantum artifact trading. Pure, crystalline, and impossibly ancient. "Come on, beautiful," he whispered to the darkness, following the signal deeper into the ship's bowels. "Daddy needs a miracle." The source of the reading sat in what remained of a stasis vault, somehow intact despite the destruction around it. Zephyr's breath caught in his throat. Nestled in a cradle of corroded metal was a heart-shaped crystal the size of his fist, pulsing with inner light that shifted between deep purple and electric blue. Each pulse sent ripples through local spacetime that made his instrument sing. He reached for it with gloved hands, and the moment his fingers made contact, the galaxy went silent. Visions flooded his mind. Vast cities of living crystal stretching between stars, beings of pure energy dancing through nebulae, and a voice ancient and melodious whispering words in a language that predated human civilization. The images faded as quickly as they'd come, leaving him gasping inside his helmet. The crystal had gone dormant, its light reduced to a faint glow, but Zephyr could feel its power humming against his palm like a caged star. His scanner was having a seizure trying to classify it. The readings jumped between temporal displacement device consciousness matrix and something his equipment labeled as dimensional anchor, classification unknown. Back on his cramped cargo ship, Zephyr ran every identification protocol he could afford. The results made his hands shake. The crystal wasn't just old, it was impossibly old, predating the formation of the crystalline empire by millennia. More importantly, every database fragment he could access pointed to the same conclusion. This was ethereal technology. The ethereals were a myth, a bedtime story used to frighten children in the outer colonies. Legend claimed they were beings of pure energy who could reshape reality with thought alone. But they'd vanished eons ago, leaving only whispers and fragments of incomprehensible technology. Most scholars agreed they'd never existed at all. But Zephyr's instruments didn't lie, and neither did the vision that had nearly stopped his heart. This crystal was real, and if the stories were true, it was worth more than the gross domestic, product of most star systems. His celebration was interrupted by an incoming transmission. The holographic image that materialized above his comm console made his blood turn to ice. Vex Malachar, chief enforcer for the Void Syndicate, his cybernetic, face set in its perpetual expression of bored malevolence. "Thorne," Vex's synthesized voice grated like metal on stone. 68 hours remaining. "I trust you've found a way to settle your account?" Zephyr forced his voice to stay steady. "Working on it, Vex. Big score coming in." "For your sake, I hope so. The Syndicate has grown tired of your excuses." The Enforcer's red optical sensors focused with mechanical precision. "Fail to deliver, and I'll personally ensure your death is educational for other debtors." The transmission cut, leaving Zephyr alone with the crystal and a desperate plan forming in his mind. His research into ethereal mythology led him down data rabbit holes that consumed precious hours, but eventually yielded a name that made his pulse quicken: Empress Lyrelai Voss of the Crystalline Empire. According to fragmentary records, her bloodline claimed descent from the ethereals themselves. A claim most historians dismissed as propaganda, designed to legitimize her rule over 36 star systems. But what if it wasn't propaganda? What if the Empress was actually connected to the crystal's origins? Zephyr had built his career on long shots and desperate gambles. This might be his last chance at both survival and the score of a lifetime. The journey to the Crystalline Empire's capital took 18 hours through hyperspace lanes that grew progressively more luxurious as he approached the system's heart. By the time his battered cargo hauler limped into orbit around Luminara Prime, he was surrounded by vessels that probably cost more than his entire net worth. The palace moon of Seraphina hung like a jewel above the gas giant, its crystalline spires reaching toward space with organic grace. Getting an audience with the Empress proved surprisingly easy. Apparently, merchants bearing ancient ethereal artifacts were granted immediate priority, though the guards who escorted him clearly expected to be dealing with another delusional treasure hunter. Zephyr found himself in a reception chamber that defied physics, its walls seeming to extend infinitely in all directions while somehow maintaining intimate proportions. The Empress sat on a throne carved from a single massive crystal, and when she looked at him, he understood why entire systems bent the knee. Lyrelei Voss was beautiful in the way that supernovas were beautiful, brilliant, terrifying, and utterly alien. Her skin held a faint translucent quality that seemed to shift with her moods, and her eyes were the deep purple of the void between stars. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that resonated in his bones. "You claim to possess ethereal technology," she said without preamble. "Show me." Zephyr's hands trembled as he withdrew the crystal from its protective case. The moment it left its containment, the chamber filled with that same impossible music he'd heard in the derelict ship. The Empress's composure cracked like glass. She rose from her throne, moving with predatory grace, her eyes fixed on the crystal, with an intensity that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "Where did you find this?" "Derelict ship in the Corvin Nebula," Zephyr managed. 300-year-old wreck, maybe older. My instruments say it's some kind of dimensional anchor. The Empress extended her hand, and Zephyr placed the crystal in her palm. The reaction was instantaneous and violent. Light erupted from the crystal, bathing the chamber in radiance that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. The Empress screamed, not in pain, but in recognition, as memories that weren't hers flooded through her consciousness. She saw herself as she truly was, not the conquering ruler of the Crystalline Empire, but Lyrelei Voss Ethemeren, last daughter of the ethereal collective, hidden away as an infant when her people retreated beyond the dimensional veil. The crystal was a key, not to treasure or power, but to the hidden realm where her true people waited in exile. When the light faded, she stood transformed. Her carefully maintained human appearance had fallen away like a discarded mask, revealing skin that shifted between translucent crystal and flowing energy, hair that moved like liquid starlight, and eyes that held the depth of eternity. "You have no idea what you've done," she whispered, her voice now carrying those same harmonic undertones that had filled the derelict ship. Zephyr, still reeling from the revelation, found his voice. "I know what I need, Your Majesty. The Void Syndicate wants 50 million credits, or they'll kill me in—" He checked his chronometer. 47 hours. The Empress looked at him with something that might have been amusement. "You bring me the key to my people's salvation and you want money?" "I want to live," Zephyr said simply. "Everything else is negotiable." For a long moment she studied him, this desperate human who had unknowingly shattered the careful lie that had been her life for 3 decades. Then she smiled, and it was terrible and beautiful and full of possibility. "Tell me, merchant," she said, her transformed features catching the light of distant stars. "What would you say if I told you that your simple request for payment might be the least dangerous thing anyone asks of me in the next few days?" Outside the Crystal Palace, warning klaxons began to sound. Long-range sensors had detected ships dropping out of hyperspace at the system's edge, vessels flying the black and crimson colors of the Void Syndicate. Time, it seemed, had run out for everyone. The Empress's impossible choice, Lyrelei Voss, had ruled the Crystalline Empire for 31 years, but she had never felt more alone than in the moments following her transformation. The quantum heart pulsed in her grasp, each beat synchronizing with memories that belonged to a life she'd never known she'd lived. She was Eth Marin, daughter of the void, last of the ethereal collective. The revelation should have filled her with joy. Her people, the beings she'd glimpsed in dreams since childhood, were alive somewhere beyond the dimensional veil. Instead, terror coiled in, her chest like a living thing, because she knew what the humans would do if they discovered the truth. "Your Majesty," came the voice of Admiral Corvin through the palace's internal comm system. "We have Void Syndicate vessels entering the outer system. They're demanding the surrender of one Zephyr Thorn for debt collection." Lyrelai looked at the merchant, who stood frozen in the center of her audience chamber, his face pale as he processed what he'd witnessed. 47 hours ago, his biggest problem had been a debt to criminals. Now he was the catalyst for a revelation that could reshape the galaxy. "Seal the palace," she commanded, her voice carrying new harmonics that made crystal fixtures throughout. The chamber rang in sympathy. "No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization." "Your Majesty?" Corvin's confusion was evident even through the comm static. "Do it, Admiral, and mobilize the 7th Fleet. We may need them." She cut the connection and turned to Zephyr, who was slowly backing toward the chamber's exit as if he could somehow escape the cosmic forces now in motion around him. "Running won't help," she said softly. "The moment you touched that crystal, you became part of something much larger than syndicate debts." "I just wanted to live," he whispered, his voice breaking. "I never meant to..." "To what?" "Discover that the Empress of the Crystalline Empire is the last member of a supposedly extinct race. To unlock memories that prove everything my subjects believe about their history is a carefully constructed lie." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You've done nothing wrong, Merchant. You've simply forced me to confront a choice I've been avoiding for 3 decades. The quantum heart pulsed brighter, and suddenly Lyrelai could feel them. Her people waiting in the space between dimensions. Thousands of ethereals, suspended in crystalline sleep, preserved in a realm where time moved differently. They had been waiting for her to find the key, to open the way home. But opening that way would require her to abandon everything she had built. The Crystalline Empire wasn't just her domain, it was her prison. She had constructed it carefully, deliberately, using her inherited ethereal abilities to inspire loyalty and maintain peace across dozens of worlds. Her subjects saw her as their divine ruler, descendant of ancient gods. They had no idea those gods had once been their mortal enemies. The historical records were clear, buried deep in archives that only she could access. The ethereals hadn't simply vanished eons ago. They had been driven out by a coalition of younger races who feared their power. Humanity had been part of that coalition, along with the ancestors of every species that now bowed before her throne. If her people returned, if the galaxy learned that ethereals still existed, the old fears would resurface. The Crystalline Empire would tear itself apart in civil war as species turned against each other, each faction trying to align with or against the returning gods. Billions would die. "Your Majesty," Zephyr said, his voice steadier now. "The Void Syndicate ships, they're not just here for me, are they?" She nodded grimly. The Syndicate's intelligence network was extensive, and they had sensors that could detect quantum signatures from light years away. If they had tracked Zephyr here, they knew about the crystal. Worse, they probably knew what it could do. "They want the crystal," she confirmed. "The Void Syndicate has been collecting ethereal artifacts for decades, though they don't fully understand what they possess. This quantum heart would make them the most powerful criminal organization in galactic history." A new voice interrupted their conversation, smooth, cultured, and utterly without warmth. "How perceptive of you, Your Majesty." They turned to see a figure materializing in the chamber's center, assembled from light and shadow by advanced holographic projectors. It was a woman with silver hair and eyes like polished chrome, wearing the black and crimson uniform of a syndicate director. "Director Nyx Shadowmere," Lyrelai said, recognizing the syndicate's chief strategist. "I should have known you were behind this." "You flatter me. I merely recognized an opportunity when our dear Mr. Thorne's quantum signature appeared." On our sensors. Nix's smile was predatory. Imagine my delight when I realized what he had found. The crystal stays here, Lyrelei said, her transformed features hardening into something that resembled carved starlight. Does it? Because I believe you're facing what we call a cascading failure scenario. Nix gestured, and the hologram expanded, to show tactical displays. My fleet is larger than yours, Empress. More importantly, I have something you lack, the willingness to destroy this entire system to get what I want. The displays showed Syndicate dreadnoughts moving into position around Luminara Prime, their weapon systems charging. But it was the smaller craft that made Lyrelei's blood freeze. Torpedo ships, each one carrying a payload designed to crack a planet's crust. You wouldn't, she breathed. I would. In fact, I'll give you a demonstration. One of the torpedo ships fired, its weapon streaking toward the agricultural moon of Terra Luna. The explosion was visible even through the gas giant's atmosphere, a brief star that consumed an entire world. 16 million people, Nix said conversationally. Gone in an instant, unless of course you'd prefer to negotiate. Zephyr stepped forward, his face pale but determined. Take me. Leave the crystal and the Empress out of this. I'm the one who owes you money. Oh, my dear merchant, this stopped being about your debt the moment you found that crystal. Though I do appreciate the theatrical gesture. Nix's attention returned to Lyrelei. You have 1 hour to decide, Empress. The crystal, or I start cracking planets. The hologram vanished, leaving them alone with the weight of impossible choices. Lyrelei closed her eyes and reached out with senses that belonged to her ethereal heritage. She could feel the quantum heart's power, vast and untapped. With it, she could open the dimensional barrier and call her people home. They would come, warriors of living energy who could sweep the Syndicate fleet aside like dust. But they would also see what she had built, this empire founded on the worship of their vanished race. They would see the humans and the other species that had once driven them into exile, now bowing before an ethereal ruler they believed to be something else entirely. Her people weren't known for forgiveness. There has to be another way, Zephyr said, his voice cutting through her dark thoughts. Is there? She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze. I can save my people or save my empire, but not both. Choose one. Merchant. You brought me this choice. Help me make it. Zephyr was quiet for a long moment, staring at the quantum heart as it pulsed with inner fire. When he spoke, his words were barely above a whisper. What if you didn't have to choose? What if there was a third option? Explain. The crystal isn't just a key. It's a dimensional anchor, right? It holds things in place across space and time. He looked up at her, hope and terror warring in his expression. What if instead of using it to bring your people back or keeping them hidden, you used it to scatter its power? Break it apart so no one could ever use it to make this choice again? Lyrelei stared at him. You're suggesting I destroy the only way to reach my people? I'm suggesting you make sure no one can ever weaponize them. The Syndicate gets nothing, your empire stays stable, and your people remain safely hidden until the galaxy is ready for their return. Outside, the countdown continued. 43 minutes until Director Shadowmere made good on her threat. Lyrelei held the quantum heart up to the light, watching the way it bent space around itself. She could feel her people calling to her across the dimensional divide, their voices full of hope and longing. They had waited so long for her to find them, to bring them home. But she could also feel the fear radiating from every world in her empire as the Syndicate fleet tightened its grip. Billions of lives hanging in the balance, depending on her to protect them from forces they couldn't comprehend. The choice was impossible. It was also inevitable. Forgive me, she whispered to the void between dimensions, speaking words her people would never hear. She raised the quantum heart above her head and spoke a command in the ethereal tongue, not to activate the crystal, but to shatter its unified structure. The heart exploded into fragments of pure light, each piece carrying a fraction of its original power as it scattered across multiple dimensions. Some fragments would find their way back to her people, giving them glimpses of the path home, but never enough to complete the journey. Others would be lost in the spaces between realities, ensuring that no single force could ever again wield the power to reshape the galaxy's destiny. Director Shadowmere's final transmission came as the last fragments faded into quantum foam. "Clever, Empress, though I suspect this isn't over." "No," Lyralee agreed, feeling the weight of her transformed nature settling around her like a crown of stars. "It's just beginning." Zephyr cleared his throat awkwardly. "About my debt?" "Cancelled," she said without looking at him. "Consider it payment for services rendered to the Crown." "And the Syndicate?" "We'll learn that there are worse things in this galaxy than unpaid debts." Her smile was sharp enough to cut light. "I may no longer be able to call my people home, but I am still ethereal, and I have just become very interested in teaching the Void Syndicate about the difference between power and wisdom." As Zephyr departed under full Imperial protection, Lyralee stood alone in her crystal chamber, watching the fragments of the quantum heart fade into memory. She had chosen to remain the Empress of Lies rather than become the Herald of Truth, and the weight of that choice would follow her for the rest of her unnaturally long life. But sometimes, she reflected, the greatest act of love was knowing when to let go. Her people would remain safe in their hidden realm, and the galaxy would remain ignorant of the forces that had once shaped its destiny. It was, she decided, a sacrifice worthy of both the woman she had become and the ethereal she had always been.